The myriad of high-tech options today to deal with infertility raises, I think, some of the most complicated moral questions in Christian ethics and in bioethics today. What's really interesting about this is how many of these technologies have, and the bioethics discussion of this has actually followed me home. Because right after I got very interested in all of these wild new ways, what were new at the time, to procreate children, as my wife and I began our own 3.5, 4-year battle with infertility. And so the first thing I think I would say to the couple is there's probably not much pain in your life that you will ever experience that will be like this. And it will challenge your gender identity. You will be exasperated with God, and it's a pain that I think most people who haven't been down that road don't entirely understand, which will probably lead some of your well-meaning friends to say relatively clueless things to you about what you're dealing with. So when they say things like, have you considered God might not want you to have children? Don't smack them. Recognize that they probably don't understand the level of pain that this involves. A few years ago, my wife had a bout with breast cancer and did the full treatment, the full chemotherapy. And I asked her one time what was worse, the whole 9 yards of cancer treatment or the bout with infertility. And she said, without hesitation, the bout with infertility was by far more difficult emotionally to deal with. Once you get past that, then you can think about some of the moral questions that have to do with these various infertility treatments. I think in general, I would tell couples that technologies that use the genetic materials of husband and wife are for the most part morally in the clear, as long as you don't throw away embryos or terminate pregnancies, right? Both of which are possibilities when many of these infertility techniques are used. The standard of practice with in vitro fertilization, which is the most common of these techniques, is to fertilize as many eggs as possible. And if the couple hits the jackpot and gets twins or triplets, their childbearing days are over, they may end up with 5, 10, 12 embryos left in storage. And so the principle that what the scripture makes pretty clear is that since from the point of conception forward, embryos and fetuses have the full right to life, that means that every embryo that the couple creates in the lab deserves an opportunity to be implanted in the womb. And if the couple is not able to do that themselves, then I would suggest what they would got to consider is an embryo adoption, where they can actually put embryos up for adoption and donate them to other infertile couples. Now, some of these technologies involve the intervention of a third party into the matrix of marriage in order to successfully result in the outcome of a child. So sperm donors, egg donors, and womb donors or surrogates are often required for some of these infertility techniques to work. And I think in general, the scripture tilts very skeptically against the intervention of a third party into the matrix of marriage. That procreation is designed to be within the confines of a permanent, monogamous, stable, heterosexual marriage. And so I think third-party contributors run the risk of running afoul of a guideline of what I would call a prima facie norm that God has set up from creation forward. Now, what makes this tricky is that there were lots of very, very creative ways that people procreated children in biblical times that were allowed, though it's probably too strong to say that they were condoned. Nonetheless, there's nothing that follows about their normative value for today, given the fact that they were allowed in biblical times. So I would suggest that the prima facie norm that God laid out in Genesis 1 and 2 tilts the playing field pretty skeptically against the introduction of third parties into that, which would I'd say the Bible's skeptical about sperm donors, egg donors, and womb donors. What I generally tell couples who have a need for or desire a sperm and egg donor, in order to keep the other spouse from feeling like there's a procreative pinch hitter coming into the game for them, I generally recommend that they consider adopting embryos. Because that way the woman gets what frequently is a value to the woman, which is the experience of pregnancy and childbirth. And yet you also get a child who you are rescuing, which I would call a heroic rescue, because those embryos are likely going down the kitchen sink at some point. And you do that without leaving one of the partners in the marriage feeling left out. So I think that's in general a really good solution instead of bringing in a third party. Right? Now you could say, well, that's bringing in a third and a fourth party actually for adoption. But I would make the argument that adoption is not procreation. Those are two different things. Adoption's a rescue, and procreation is something different than that.